What makes Greyledge different? What's their, for lack of a better term, value proposition?
Yeah, what's our MO? The field was driven and it matured with very low quality control. So, for example, medical devices really were responsible for driving utilization in the early days, excuse me, on the field. And in that situation, you would input a sample, the device would process it, a final product would come out the other end, and you had no idea what was in it. There was no measurement, there were no analytics, there was no quality control whatsoever. And I started out using these devices a number of years ago, just like everyone else. And even with no quality control, we were still seeing trends towards some reasonable and healthy outcomes.
And you were still within the range of what was legal or ethical to do.
At the time, it was the best we had. So utilizing that, I just didn't feel it was acceptable as a practitioner. So the concepts of Greyledge came from feeling that that was inadequate. We had to do better. We had technology that could allow us to do better. So Greyledge's value proposition is that we provide the quality control and analytics. We have a quality management program that is set up based on something called CLIA. CLIA is a federal body that oversees hospital laboratories. When we started this, there was no playbook. There was no one to oversee us. There was no one to regulate us. We had to go to what we felt was the closest model, and we are a lab, so we went to the gold standard, which was CLIA. So we set up our operating procedures in a quality program based on a CLIA standard, again, the organization that would come in and audit your hospital lab. Then we invited CLIA to come in and take a look at our stuff, and they did. They showed up. And they were great, and they went through and provided some useful feedback, and at the end of that first audit of many audits, they said, well, Dave, you would meet our criteria, but technically you don't fall under our jurisdiction. So then it gave us our foundation, and that was important, right? So we looked at good manufacturing practices and good laboratory practices and different quality control measures. And then, of course, we looked at the FDA. When we organized Greyledge, we said we wanted to create an analytical platform that would allow us ultimately to look at dose-response relationships. So
for folks that are listening that don't know what a dose-response relationship is, can you dig into that just a little?
Well, to go back to my earlier analogy, so you have a device which puts out a product, you don't know what's in it. How do you determine if it worked? Because 10 different patients will produce 10 totally different samples. So if we could at least know what was in it, we can look at the components of the biologic, and we can break down the different cells and cell populations and the number of platelets and different analytical measurements. And then we can run that in parallel with outcomes. How does the patient do? And then you can say, well, this group of patients did well. What was it about their biologic that we might identify as a trend that would alert us or trigger us to make it better? Mm-hmm. This group didn't do so well. Is there something as a common thread that we could find in that group that would trigger us maybe to identify a patient that may not do so well, or we have to alter their protocol, or we have to process it differently, or do something different? So it was dose, in this case, measuring the numbers of cells and cell populations. That's our dose, if you will, and response. How did the patient do?
And that's your data collection effort.
Well, that's the platform that's set up now to improve the quality and statistical relevance of the research, right? So here's the analogy I use. If you have a blood pressure problem and you have 5 different blood pressure medicines and you give that to a bunch of patients but you don't know which dose you gave, how do you prove what's an effective dose? Mm-hmm. And that's the situation we were in when this whole field really started, probably around 04, 05. Again, didn't feel it was acceptable, so we wanted to create a platform to address that particular problem. Let's at least know what's in it, if for no other reason than to provide safety measures to our patients. We also knew that the FDA would view this not in the same way it would view a drug, because we can get into later the difference between what we do and drug development. But we knew if we followed or tracked that standard in the language that they knew, they were less likely to be concerned about what we were doing. And we designed the company from day one to meet the FDA's expectations based on our interpretation of what they wanted. So we went out and found CLIA. We went out and found elements of good manufacturing practices. We went out and found elements of good laboratory practices. And we kind of melded it into this standard operating platform and quality management platform that satisfied elements of each. And then we invited the FDA to come and have a look by registering.